Good morning, everybody. I hope you can all hear and see me. Thank you for joining us on our live Q&A with SharePoint tips and tricks. My name is Justin Sherwood. I'm the Managing Director of Seriun, and I'm joined with Andy Brookfield, who is our Business Systems Consultant. We've got most people in, but just a quick top tip. If you post a question on the Q&A, please don't forget to put your name in the bar at the top so that we know who we're responding to. It won't be published. It's just for internal. So without further ado, we'll get started. For those of you who don't know who we are or what we do or why we do it, we're an IT, telecoms and software company. We provide bespoke software development and off-the-shelf solutions. We're a Microsoft and 3CX partner. 3CX is a hosted telephony system. So in these challenging times, a hosted system, we can move your on-premise telephone system into the cloud, and your team can connect to that fairly easily. And we've done a number of these webinars over the past few weeks, and we've got three more to come over the next few weeks. So Laura, who's behind the scenes along with Jordan, and they classified as producers, we're the presenters, will be sending out some information on those future webinars. So please do join us for that, and we will also be doing some workshops where we'll ask you to suggest what we work on. It'll be less of a presentation style and more of a kind of collaboration and a workshop. Probably reduced down to smaller teams, smaller groups of people as we move forward. There should be a link published to our Meet the Team page where you can see more of our pretty or ugly faces. You decide on our website. So what is SharePoint? SharePoint was launched way back in 2001. It probably really kind of got noticed and used in earnest, certainly for smaller businesses, when it became part of the Office 365 suite of applications. It's primarily an intranet and a document management system. So we'll discuss more about that as we go through, and Andy will demonstrate some of the functionality in his demo shortly. The whole idea about it behind it is to empower and bring your teams and your organizations together and record and store data and documents across your business or organization, and that's delivered with a very powerful workflow and collaboration engine behind it. So you can do things such as a health and safety documentation. You've got document management, so you can go from draft to publish documents and have a single version of the truth, and distribute those through automated alerts, etc., which we'll go through in more detail. And the workflow functionality is quite advanced, and there's a whole host of things that you can do behind the scenes in a technical capacity. But ultimately, the kind of core function is to manage your content from an organization perspective. It's certainly a scalable solution. It can go all the way up to large enterprise or blue chip, down to a micro business, but we'll go through more detail in that in the coming slides and demos. This infographic kind of gives you a broad sort of view on SharePoint and its components. It is fairly vast. There's a kind of build and customization section. There's search and kind of discover, which allows you to be compliant with the e-discovery, with GDPR and data protection, etc. You can publish Power BI reports within SharePoint and many other kind of integrated applications. OneDrive the OneDrive client is used with SharePoint. We'll go in more detail in latter slides. The main kind of thrust for it is sharing and engaging with your team. There is a mobile app for it, so it allows you to gain access to the announcements or news feeds, or kind of like I guess a sort of Facebook for the business. There are other products in the Office 365 suite called Yammer, not for this kind of webinar, but we'll be going through that in later events. So the kind of big question that we asked from a lot of you and the kind of user base out there is, what's the cost, and how, and is there a free version? Yes, there is a free version. It's called SharePoint Foundation. It's only available if you install SharePoint on premise, so within a server within your organization, and it's probably not recommended given the fact that your SharePoint is included with the Office 365 suite. It's part of most, if not all, the Office 365 product SKUs, except for the P1, which is just the mailbox or Exchange component within 365. So you get out of the box, or included with this, you get about a terabyte of space to use for your documents, and so it's included with your Office 365 suite. It's an online product, so it's or a website or a web application. So you obviously need an internet connection to access it. You can synchronize files, but we'll go through that in more detail in Andy's demo, and it should be used with caution. And now, Microsoft, as they do from time to time, rename their products, or a lot, some might argue. So we've got a renaming happening. I think it's today or yesterday or whenever it was. So it's now, they're essentially dropping the name Office because their offering has extended beyond the kind of Office application or the Office suite, and now they're renaming it as Microsoft to sort of explain or elaborate on the other apps that are included in the offering. It's the same pricing, and it's just a new name. We'll probably still refer to it as Office 365 for some weeks or months to come, but we'll do our best to switch. So with that, I'll hand over to Andy, who will conduct a SharePoint demo, and over to you, Andy.
Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Brookfield. I'm one of the business application consultants over at Seriun, and I'll just go through now and do a bit of a whistle-stop tour of SharePoint and some of its functionality. So first thing really that you'd want to know, one, I'm showing you the online version of SharePoint, which if you've got 365 you will have. The easiest way I find to access it, as with all the components of 365, is to go to, it's actually portal.office.com. But if you go to office.com and log in, you can see all of the 365 things that you have, and you'll notice you've got a button on there for SharePoint, which will take you through to this. You can just go into your address bar, and generally speaking, that will just be your organization.sharepoint.com. So we've got one that's seriun.sharepoint.com as an example. So what's it used for? Well, as Justin said, primarily it is a intranet, so you can create your own web pages and build a internal web page site with whatever you want to share with your staff. You can also as well publish these externally, so if you're working with third parties and you want to have a collaborative section of documents, then you can do that as well. There's a load of permissions built around this, so you can set specific permissions to say who can make changes to this site and who can view them. And also as well, if you want to have external people accessing it, that's available as well. Okay, so there's also the functionality built into it to quickly theme the look and feel of any sites that you've got with the change the look and themes. So if you've got a particular color scheme and you don't like Microsoft's default blue for everything and your company's red with everything, you can very quickly just change the look and feel of it to match your company's branding. Okay. One of the key areas that we see most people using SharePoint for, though, rather than the intranet, is more about the document functionality for it. In SharePoint, you have a function of document libraries. Now, document libraries are what you can use to replace a lot of the functionality of normal network drives and allow you to work on documents remotely. And in this day and age, it's very useful to be able to have these in a shared cloud environment. The document libraries are created automatically for any team sites that you create. I did mean to very briefly actually talk about the different types of sites that you can get. So you have different kinds of sites that can be created of communications or team sites, and a new function is a hub site, which ties everything together nicely. So you get this sort of bar across the top so you can see where everything is. If you're wanting to put together an entire structure of it, you might want to come to us and have a chat and we can go through setting out what that might look like. Back onto the document library functionality though. Once you've got files in here, it's very powerful in what it allows you to do. So if you've got a document stored in here and you want to revert back to a previous version of a file, you can very easily, by clicking on these ellipses here, and if it doesn't show me that, see the previous versions and changes that have occurred on a file. And if you wanted to restore one from an earlier point, you can very quickly do that. The more powerful functions in there is the ability to have multiple people editing a document at the same time. I personally quite like the browser versions of the 365 suite these days. They're quite good. And if you open the file, you can directly view it in your browser. But not only that, you can now edit these documents live. So I can change the text in there. And you may notice that straight away, this is saved and changed live without the need to go file, save as, and then re-upload it and put it somewhere else. That's the same for any of the Office suite, really. So you can even amend a PowerPoint presentation or an Excel spreadsheet directly just in the browser without having to open the full fat product on your computer. Okay, there's good functionality on here as well for sharing files. So once your files are in a document library, with that button there, you can quickly share them to other members of your organization or even external people. So you can say, here is the file you were looking for. And if I press send on that, they will get an email with a link that will take them directly to this file. And if they click on that, they will be viewing and potentially, depending upon the permissions you set on here, be editing that same document that you were working on. So you're not having that problem that you may have traditionally had, where you've got countless copies of the same document knocking about in email attachments that you're then having to copy, paste, overwrite, and make sure you've got all of this management of which version is the latest version of it, if everyone is just working on that same version of that file. Okay, so yeah, there is loads of functionality behind this as well with the sharing. Be careful with it. If you do share a file with a new person, then you are actually changing the permissions to that file as well. So if it is worth pointing out here, if you need to lock that down, if you want to lock that down, come to us, and there are a lot of functions that we can do to restrict sharing with external contacts, for example. So if you want to have it so that people can only share within your organization or even to a predefined list of other companies based upon their email address, then we can do that as well. Another good bit of document management, I suppose, really in this is the capability to check a document out. So if you've got a document that you want to make a lot of changes to and sort of review and then publish once you've finished your work on that document, you can check a document out. And what that does is it sort of locks that document so that nobody else can make changes to that while you're working on it. And once you've finished working on that document, you can then check that back in. Oh, was it that one? I missed it. Okay, but you can check that document back in and it will ask you to record what changes you'd made to that. I'll just run through that quickly just so that we can see it on this one. That does lead me on to a little bit as well on what problems that we do get with this. If you do check a document out, bearing in mind that sort of sets it to read only. So one of the things that we do get some support calls on off the back of this is people thinking that a file's got read only, and it's because someone's got it checked out. And generally, first point of call would be to go to whoever that is and ask them to check it back in. Some changes. But if for whatever reason you can't find out who it is that's got that checked out, then speak to your IT guys. If you're with us, then give us a shout and we can just check that back in manually for you. Okay. All right, so in this as well, what you do have the functionality to do, I know that Justin mentioned about workflows. So there's a few different things that you can tie into this with alerts. So if you wanted on this file to say, if anyone makes a change to this Word document, or again, it could be an Excel spreadsheet or a PowerPoint, any Word document will be okay. You can sign up to get an email whenever anyone changes it or whenever somebody else has made a change. And anytime that that file is amended, you'll be alerted to it. There's also the functionality to do that for the entire document library. So I can sign up for almost like a folder and say, if anyone adds any new files into this, I want to be notified. I want to get an email to say that that's occurred. And this with the alert me functions, that's more of like the traditional SharePoint functionality with their alerts. You just get a simple email. But nowadays, with the whole 365 revolution and the whole Power Platform idea that Microsoft are going really heavy on at the moment, it's also tied into what's now known as Power Automate. It was until recently known as Microsoft Flow, but they've changed its name now. So with Automate, what you can do is you can create a flow. So maybe you don't necessarily just want an email to come to you when a file is added to this. You might want to update an Excel spreadsheet. So say, for example, you've got a folder that's a list of your policies and procedures. And when someone uploads a new Word document as a procedure, you've got an Excel spreadsheet or a SharePoint list, which I'll come to shortly. And if you wanted to add on to that, this new file that's been created, then you can create a flow to add that to it. Or if you wanted to, simply you can create a flow that does send you an email or even a text message as well. And again, these flows can be on a folder or on a specific file. Okay, and I keep saying flow. I don't know whether I should really start using the word automate or Power Automate flows or something, but either way. Right, okay, so moving on from there. Right, so another good little tool that you have in document libraries, if you've got a folder with lots and lots of documents in there, and you might want to categorize them in some way, shape or form. Say, for example, it's a folder full of images, and these might be product images, and some of these might be in packaging, out of packaging, whatever it may be. Your business needs may vary. But quickly from a folder or library, as I should say, you can add additional columns to that. So that may be a single line of text where you might specify that that column is image type, and you can add a description for what that might be. Or you can say a yes, no, and say, is this private or something like that? Then you can flag it, and you can flag that that file has that type of category about it. Right, so another function in here that I quite like, again, a lot of this is about pictures really. If you've got a folder full of images, so document images, it's really powerful for that. Under this section here, you can view your library in lots of different ways. So by default, they'll all be in as a list, but the tiles function is very powerful if you've got lots of pictures in a folder where you can quickly see the thumbnails of any of the images that you've got in that folder or library and view them in a very quick manner. There's also filters that you can apply to this. So again, imagining you've got a folder here with thousands of items in there, and if you wanted to just filter that using this filter button, Microsoft seems to be using this quite a lot for their iconography, and I can just say I want to look for just the Word documents in there. So again, that's pretty good if you know that it's a Word document that you're looking for. But what's more powerful, and one of the most powerful functions really in SharePoint, is the search. Now, the search in SharePoint is exceptional, really. Anytime a document is uploaded into a SharePoint document library, not just the name of it is searchable, it actually indexes the content of them files as well. So if I've uploaded a document and I know that it's got the word marketing in there, then when I search, if I can spell, I'll just start with Mark, then it is looking through all of these documents for anything that has the word marketing in there. In this case, just the titles of them, but still it does. Now, that search isn't just on document libraries. If you do have multiple sites and pages in your SharePoint setup, you can search the entire site, or, oh, bear with me. Some of these get a little bit strange with the way that they're put up. You can search your entire SharePoint setup. A quick way of getting to this so that you can see all of the subsites and everything that are in your SharePoint setup that you've got available to you. If you're in a team site, you can just click that SharePoint bit there, and that will take you through to this. And I can search, for example, for the retail team SharePoint team site. In this case, I'm looking at sales and marketing, but still. All right, so you've got that. Something that we do get quite a lot of questions about as well is Justin mentioned before about integration with OneDrive. It's not really an integration as such what I'm talking about here, but there is a sync function available to document libraries. So you can choose to synchronize a document library to your local machine by using this sync button. Now, what that will do is it will put a copy of these files onto your local computer so that if you're going to go somewhere where you might have a patchy internet connection, say you're going on a train somewhere and there's a lot of tunnels on that and you want a copy of them, then you can synchronize them files to your computer. It's a very powerful feature, but generally speaking, we like to say you're probably best to only do this on smaller libraries, things like price lists or something along them lines, and not the more huge document libraries that you might have with like general documents and things in there, where you've got thousands of documents. Like we said, you get a terabyte of storage as part of SharePoint, and if you've got that terabyte, you don't want to be downloading that and synchronizing that onto your local machine, potentially even over Wi-Fi or 5G on your phone or whatnot. This sync function, if you do not want that to be enabled, there are admin things we can do behind the scenes to disable that as well. Okay, so on that, yeah, there's also another bit of a caveat with this sync as well. And also as well, if you're uploading files to SharePoint, there are some slight differences in the way that files are stored and the naming conventions that you can and can't have on a SharePoint library versus if you've got something locally on a network drive or on your PC. So be careful when trying to upload things like empty files with no data in it. SharePoint don't like that because it's nothing to index. And also if you've got symbols in your file names, there are some that aren't allowed in SharePoint. So if you are getting some errors when trying to upload it, you might need to rename your files. Okay, so moving on from there. And again, we can disable all of that. And there's some other security things we can do in the background of that as well, if there are some files that you really don't want people taking down to their local computer. Right, so one of the other powerful bits of functionality in SharePoint is the idea of lists. So SharePoint lists, you can almost sort of think of them as Excel spreadsheets, but you've just got a lot more control and functionality around them. So what you can do from here is you can put together a structured list of the types of data that you might want to record. So in this case, we've got this down as being a product list, and we've got these different columns. So similar as what we could see with adding your own columns in a document library, you can sort of build your own application in a way. and just the kind of things that you want to record, and put different column types. Sorry, that's just giving me a message there. And you can add different column types as to what you would like that with that. It's quite useful with this because it's a lot more locked down than you would do with Excel, where you can just type whatever you want in a box. By doing it in a SharePoint list, you can restrict it so that it's got to be that type of data that's in there. So you don't get people typing no mobile into a mobile number box or Tuesday into a date field. So you can actually lock that down quite well. Again, on these lists, you do have this whole workflow thing as well built into it. So you can use the Power Automate flows to make things happen when something is added to a list. So again, that might be, you might want to put a copy of this into an Excel spreadsheet. You might want an email off the back of it. There's all sorts of things that you can do with Flow. That's probably another one that we'll want to do, another webinar just on Power Automate and Flow, and also maybe even Power Apps as well. Another one, I won't get too far into that. Right, okay, so with the lists, you can do that. Okay, now more onto the intranet side of things now. Whenever you create a site for a team site, now these are created automatically off the back of Teams as well, which while I've mentioned that, I'll let you guys know we have done a previous webinar on Teams. We've got a YouTube channel with all of these on. So hit us up if you'd like a link to have a look through Teams as well. And if I click on the right button. So this is the sort of team site, and SharePoint allows you to make your own web pages. So when you're in here, very easily, without really needing to know any sort of web development kind of things, you can just edit the page and start to add different bits of content into it as to whatever is relevant for you. So quite easily, no previous web development needed. You can just start to build up a site and whatever you may want to add into this, you can. There's a lot of different types of tools that they've put on here where there's different bits of content that you can add, and these are referred to as web parts. Some of them are very, very powerful, and there are other ones that you can get from a sort of entire ecosystem of custom ones with like maps that you can put on there. Generally speaking, when you're getting started, you might just want to put some text on there. There's a news feed type thing that's quite useful for some businesses if you want to communicate out some changes in your organization or such, that you can put on an internal news feed sort of site. What I do like using these for as well is to add links as well. So if you, for example, have couriers or vendors that you refer to their websites quite often, you can create a page or a site, and within that you can say so www.dhl.com, and that will allow you to put together almost like a favorites for commonly visited websites for your business, without everybody in your organization having to manually go through and create their own favorites list in their browser every time someone starts or leaves or anything. Okay, so I will just show you some of the other kinds of apps that are in this list, or should I say web parts. So you've got that, you've got some text, you can do maps, and there's lots and lots of other functions available to you. Have a play. If you do know a bit of web development, you can even add little bits of code in there, and loads and loads of functionality. Just play with them and you can have a go and see what they come up with and if they're useful for you. Every business will be different in what they'll want for these, so feel free to just have a play. And if there is a sort of overarching end goal that you're getting to, feel free to give us a shout and we can have a word and see how we could get to that kind of thing for you. Okay, so I think that's really all I wanted to show you in SharePoint. So if I ask Justin to come back, and we'll go through the rest of the PowerPoint.
Thanks, Andy. So we'll move on to some questions that you've kindly sent in. So the first kind of, and we tried to group these questions in a kind of in sets, because we did get quite a large number of them. So the first kind of section is getting started. So what's the best way to get started, and some practical examples? So we kind of recommend that the out of the box, your SharePoint site will be a kind of a frame, I guess, and ready to go. So log into the Office portal, click on SharePoint, and start uploading some of your documents, whether that's some images or some health and safety or HR documents that your team can kind of start to use and interact with, and then build upon that. It's quite a vast product. There's it can get daunting or overwhelming. So probably the best place to start is the document management kind of or library components of SharePoint. Some practical examples of how it can be used would be to go beyond just a normal file sharing or a file server or kind of scenario, and actually start putting some columns on your documents and getting your team engaged, and maybe using the alert me function to start seeing the benefits of what a document management solution can provide. With that, I'll hand over to Andy to answer the last question on this slide.
Hi. So SharePoint application and benefits. So hopefully from the demo, I've shown you some useful things that you might get out of SharePoint. Generally speaking, you'd be wanting to use it really for developing your own internal web pages or collaboration pages with people that you deal with quite often, external contacts in that. But one of my favorite bits of it really is the document management. You may have noticed that from how much I spent in there, giving you the functionality to be able to have multiple people editing the same document at the same time, sharing files, so you're not having multiple copies knocking about in people's mailboxes. They're the key benefits really, in my opinion, for it. Okay, so if we move on to the next one. Okay, so one of the questions that we did get asked on here was about creating a shared notebook. Some of you may have noticed on the example that I was using, when you create a team site, automatically it does create a shared sort of notebook on there, and it's called Notebook on this team as well. Behind the scenes, that's actually another 365 product called OneNote. I really like OneNote. It's a bit more of a free form sort of note-taking application, a bit better than Word, where you can just click wherever you want and start making a text box without really having to think about it. So it's good for just getting stuff out really, really quickly. You do actually have the opportunity as well, rather than just doing it like that. If you've just got a document library, you can open OneNote, create a OneNote note, and then save that into SharePoint, into your document library, and then share that out with other people. And again, they'll all be working on that same file because of the SharePoint function. Okay, so you got on there about searching for a particular file or document within the folders. So again, that's really using that search bar at the top. I think we showed that on there. So hopefully that answered that one. Moving on. Okay, so someone's asked here as well about structuring SharePoint in a good way for a company with sites, groups, and etc. I would really say that anything that you'd have a sort of separate network drive for, or departments, you'd really want to create another subsite for, a team site maybe. And when you create a team site, you automatically get a document library. A lot of this is handled for you as well if you're using Microsoft Teams. So if you're using Microsoft Teams, you can create a team in Teams. It will create you a team site in SharePoint, create the whole 365 group and the security permissions and everything behind the scenes for you. That's probably a good way to get started for a small company. Do it with Teams, create your teams based upon your departments, and a lot of this will be done behind the scenes for you automatically, and it'll just be there so that you can start working with it. But again, try and keep it like you would do your folder structure is a good idea behind that. Okay, next one. Okay, so integration. This is a group of questions regarding integration. So let's see what we've been asked. Next slide, please. Feel like I'm doing the Corona thing.
Sorry, there's a bit of a delay. It is on the next slide.
Not a problem. Yeah, the government do that on theirs, don't they, at 5 o'clock every day? Right. So SharePoint integration with other products. So there's quite a lot of integration in regards to the 365 suite. Word and Excel now actually have in the file open and file save, you now have SharePoint in there. So any document libraries that you've been working with automatically show so that you can very quickly save files into SharePoint if you've been using it. In regards to the team integration, I did mention briefly that you create SharePoint sites within Teams, but also as well, if you've got some lists or pages within SharePoint that you want to publish, but more make visible, I suppose, in Teams, there are ways to add tabs in Teams so that you can link that to a SharePoint list or page and tie it all together, really. So we've been asked as well by someone saying that they're using it for an intranet at the moment, but they wanted to know if they could use it more in their daily work. Well, I'd really say start looking at the document library functionality. The capability of having multiple people working on the same document is amazing. And once you start doing that and have a lot of your documents that you're working on stored in that way, you're probably, well, I these days don't know how I lived without it. Okay, so moving on from that, does SharePoint replace and integrate with documents on a local drive? It can be used to as a different place of storing documents, but I like to use a differentiation really of it's for documents, not for data. So if you've got stuff that you do in Word and Excel, it's a really good place to store that kind of information. Also as well, things like PDFs. So if you've got a massive list of PDF files, invoices from suppliers or something, bang them into a library on SharePoint. That indexing functionality does index PDFs as well, so you can search PDFs from within SharePoint, but I wouldn't say use it for if you're authoring PDFs. So if you've got the Adobe Suite and you're writing PDF documents, the whole sort of multiple people editing and it being on there, it doesn't work that great for that. But with the 365 Suite and Microsoft Business Applications, it's brilliant for that. So hopefully that answers that one. So moving on. Okay, so how does SharePoint relate to other parts of Microsoft Teams? Again, I think I've covered that quite well on there. They're all sort of tied together. Teams, in a way, is sort of like a layer on top of SharePoint, is where that I like to think about it. Teams is bringing lots of things together with the messaging capability that you used to have as part of Skype for Business. Skype for Business isn't gone yet. It's due to go end of life next year. Just point that one out for anyone still using Skype for Business. You probably want to look at moving on to Teams fairly shortly, and you do get a lot more out of it as well. So hopefully that answers that. Okay, next one.
Right, thanks, Andy. So does SharePoint work on a hosted server? So as it's a web application, the answer to that is yes. Andy has actually been demoing it on a terminal or remote desktop services desktop, essentially. So if you're using a remote desktop or a hosted desktop, where you have a local device, whether it's a laptop or a PC or a terminal, or connected to the server, it should work absolutely fine as a web page. Obviously, the context of that needs to be thought through. So if you have files on your local laptop or desktop and you want to upload those to the library, you're probably better off just browsing to the web page on your local machine and uploading the files to the SharePoint library, and then using them with your hosted desktop within that environment to integrate with your other apps. So, for example, the Teams application can be a challenge on a hosted desktop because you have it needs access to your camera and microphones. And there's a little bit more technical sort of requirements with that. So the next set of questions is how SharePoint kind of works with other applications and their differences. So a question we get asked quite a lot is, what's the difference between SharePoint and OneDrive? And the next kind of infographic, it hopefully illustrates that. OneDrive, there's two products within OneDrive. There's a consumer version, which is just called OneDrive, and then there's a OneDrive for Business version, which is obviously for business or commercial use. The OneDrive is effectively, think of it in the old school way of My Documents or Documents folder. So you can upload your personal or your personal documents to OneDrive, which takes it or moves it from your local machine to the cloud, and then or synchronizes it really from your local machine to your cloud, to the cloud, so that if your laptop gets lost or stolen, or your hard drive fails on your PC, you've still got access to that data, and you can access it using the OneDrive for mobile application. You can access it using the browser in any environment. Whereas SharePoint is really geared around teams and putting your data in a sales or marketing team, or a division or a department within your business. If that team requires access to the data, you use SharePoint, and then further on from that, it's your wider for the wider organization to store your documents and the intranet site. Obviously, OneDrive doesn't have the intranet component like SharePoint. So that kind of leads us on to what's the difference between OneDrive and other document sort of storage, personal document storage applications like Citrix, ShareFile, or Dropbox, and so on. So OneDrive is specific to the 365 suite. It's geared. It obviously uses your single sign-on and your 365 account, whereas anything else is it's a whole separate security system. So often we have what we call in the industry shadow IT. So it's an individual that will go off and try and find a solution to something, instead of, I guess, potentially going to IT and kind of going off piste. We recommend against that. If you're an Office 365 subscriber, use OneDrive. It does very similar things, if not more functionality than ShareFile and Dropbox. It's contained within your organization, so your security, your features like that are specific to OneDrive. Will SharePoint replace our drives on the server and free up space? So the answer to this is technically yes and no. As Andy has mentioned, it's a document storage system. It's not a data storage system. So effectively, it's not necessarily replacing your file server, but it can be in addition to, in a sort of hybrid environment, where you're moving your documents into a document management solution, and you are leaving your data or your files on the file server to be used in a local on a local area network connection. It obviously will, if you migrate your documents onto SharePoint, it will free up some space naturally. It's quite a good time to use this as a bit of a spring cleanup. If you are going to migrate your files to SharePoint, think about from a use case scenario and what files you need to migrate, and what files can you kind of archive off or effectively that you no longer use, and then kind of go through the migration. So it's not really geared to replace your file server, but yes, technically it can free up some space. The map drive functionality that you get from a file server is kind of specific to that. You don't really, Microsoft's kind of moving away from the notion of map drives when it comes to SharePoint and the like. So I'll hand you back on to Andy to carry on.
Hi again, guys. Okay, so these are a group of questions that have been asked really about security and permissions within SharePoint. So if I can have the next slide. So we've been asked if you can password protect shared files and sensitive information when you're sharing it into SharePoint. Well, badly worded, but still, from me, not the question. Now, what I would say in the first place is if you've got an Excel file or something like that, you might want to really start looking at the password protected functionality within Excel. These days, the password functions on there are actually really quite good. It does actually encrypt the file so that it can't be opened without the password, and that way, even if it gets copied and downloaded to someone's machine, they still need to know that password to be able to open it in any way, shape or form. I was actually informed yesterday as well that you can have password protected links sent out from SharePoint, where we can probably send out a document with some instructions as to how to do that to whoever it was that asked that question. So we'll take a note to do that outside of here. But it is possible to do that kind of thing on there. What I would say though is, rather than using passwords, you're probably better to look at like the security side of things and just actually managing it from the top level rather than a password, because if you need to restrict access to somebody in the future, you can just remove their permissions to it. You can't remove that password from their head. Okay, well, not yet. Right, so next one, please. Go. It's just taking a second to come through on this one, unfortunately. Now, I do have the next question on here as well, if it's not updating on the PowerPoint, so I can start answering that either way. Here we go. So how do I store confidential documents? So there is actually some other flags that you can do for confidential documents where you can, Jordan, who's on the call at the moment, will kick me for forgetting what this is, but there's a flag that you can set basically either on a library or a file to say that it is sort of like a restricted document so that people can't get that downloaded or synced outside of the business. But again, you've got the entire permission structure around the site or the document library, and you can even set permissions directly on a file. Again, be careful with that share button, and you might want us to turn that off if you want. Okay, different types of permissions. What do they entitle people to do with it? So you've got different permissions at different levels within the organization. You have permissions to say people can and can't create sites. Within a site, you can say people can and can't add pages. If you're saying pages, they can generally add lists as well. But you've got basically the same kind of permissions that you would do on a file server in regards to the document libraries, where you can say that people have the capability to read, to add new documents to something or not. But there's a whole entire permission structure set up on there. We've also been asked as well a question on here about ensuring data protection. It depends which way you're looking at it from that. In data protection, as to if you're wanting to make sure that your data's like safe and that you've got a copy of it, we generally advise people for all of the sort of 365 infrastructure that you probably do want to have a backup as well. Just because it's in the cloud, Microsoft do have stuff, but belt and braces approach would be to look at potentially having a backup solution to back up your documents on SharePoint to something else. Like there are products that we have which just gone off my mind at the moment, but still we do have some available. And also as well, the same with your 365 mailboxes as well. If your email is stored in 365, you may want to have a look at that, because we have had instances previously where on the Microsoft side of things, something may have gone corrupt. And if you want to restore it and you've got stuff that you really need to keep safe, then there's no harm in having a backup for that as well. If you're looking at data protection as to prevent people from sharing stuff outside that you don't want them to, again, there are admin functions behind the scenes that we can do to prevent that. There's also another product as part of the 365 suite, which is sort of like a data protection that's not really just on SharePoint, but more about 365 as a whole, which has some really good functionality in there, where it, for example, can look through the body of an email or an instant message or anything, and even if it looks like it might be credit card details that are in there, it'll block that message or email and prevent that from coming through, and also prevent someone from downloading copies of files that might have confidential stuff in there. Okay, so the next one is asking about an Access database via SharePoint and having multiple people doing it on there. Access used to have quite a lot of functionality within the SharePoint environment. They did used to have a web part or a web app for Access, so that you could do most of the stuff for Access within SharePoint. Unfortunately, that's been depreciated now, and Microsoft really is starting to bang the drum more on the Power Platform and common data model side of things. So if you've got something that's in Access, there's nothing been said about it yet, but it may be worth looking at starting to see if you can do something like that with the Power Apps functionality and moving away from that. But Access really doesn't really work that well in SharePoint. Okay, so next one. And I think that's it.
Yeah, so thank you, everybody. We have had quite a number of questions come in on the live Q&A panel. So, and Jordan has done a fantastic job of replying to those. I think 5 have been published, so everybody can benefit from that. I don't know if we want to kind of go through. We've got 5 minutes left before we finish. I could maybe just pick out a one that hasn't been published. Bear with me 1 second while I just have a look. In fact, I think they've all been published by the looks of things.
There is one about my collection of axes that hasn't.
Where do you see that, Andy? Sorry.
Under the live event, Andy, one of the so I have been asked where my collection of axes has gone. So you may notice that there's been a few things buzzing around my head, and I'm playing about with some of the Teams functionality for custom backgrounds. So I'm using some of the AI bit in there to spot which is my face and which is a background. I've tried to make my background match Justin's wallpaper as much as possible, but I'm still in my garage.
I guess Simon asked a question along the lines of, can more than one person edit a document at the same time? Yes. The kind of as Jordan sort of responded to that, the answer is yes. You can access the documents and you can use the kind of authoring both on the web app as well as the full sort of featured client within Office, whether that's Word, Excel, PowerPoint. You can edit a document simultaneously, and you can actually see what the others are doing during that time. So I can't remember the limit of, or if there is a limit of how many people can edit at the same time. Can you, Andy?
We had 30 in it.
Yeah. So it should suffice across any kind of real world scenario, and it kind of, if you watch the other events, Andy kind of that will be on YouTube, Andy goes through that and demos that on an Excel spreadsheet, but it kind of shows a little toolbox with a tooltip of who's doing what in real time. And it works quite well, and that kind of, if you open that document in Teams, within the Teams kind of app, it does the same thing, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And that's, I'd just like to add on to that as well, because I didn't really show it too much on there. But that's either using the web versions of Word and Excel, but also the desktop app as well. So if your documents are stored in SharePoint and you're editing them using the desktop version of the app, you can still have multiple people amending that same file. It's not just linked to the web client stuff or the Teams client. It's any one of the three. The only one that doesn't is if you're not using the 365 stuff, but don't.
Okay, there's another question from Darren. Can you use the security and permissions from Active Directory? Yes. So I guess the brief answer to that, there's two security engines or structures to SharePoint. You can use the SharePoint specific kind of integration or security model within SharePoint, which out of the box, that's generally what happens. But you can also switch it to Active Directory integration. They're probably best for a follow-up on that, because it's quite technical, and there's some gotchas, and it can and if I'm not mistaken, and maybe Jordan can help, I think you can switch from one to the other, but I don't know if you can switch back. Anyway.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that we've missed from a Q&A perspective?
Okay, we have been asked quickly about like a Power Apps and Flow one. That's not one that's in the pipeline yet, but if we get asked about it, we will be putting something like that together for people and starting doing a bit of a tour about Power Apps and Flow if we get enough people asking about it. The next couple of them that are coming up, there is one about 365 apps in general, which I might touch on it again a little bit more. we're yet to define that really, I think. But yeah, if we get asked about it, we could probably put something together.
Excellent. Thanks, Andy. Right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending. We really appreciate it, and we hope that you've got some value out of that. Please keep your eyes and ears peeled for the next series and the next installment, and we'll see you soon. I hope everybody has a great day, and thanks again. Cheerio. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Bye.